Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Zach, and we got a great show today, where we're looking back about the exploration of the New World in the 1500s and kind of all the great technological and scientific advances that were done there. However, I can't explore the world alone, so as always, I'm joined by Rafe. Rafe, how are we doing today?
Hey Zach, I'm fantastic. It is. I know that comes as a surprise to you, but our big winter storm seems to be abating uh, more and more with every passing day. We have sunshine now, mid 40s degrees, and the snow is melting, and the icicles are dripping, and the roads are clearing. And I was able to get to the gas station this morning for my chicken and waffle sandwich for breakfast. So it is a great day.
A great day to be a Rafe, it sounds like.
Yes, it is. All right, before I go any further, Zach, I need to do a couple things, and like I said, I did this. I mistakenly forgot to do this a couple episodes ago, and it's really important to do this because before we start, thank you to the listeners. Without you guys listening, we are literally talking to the walls, well, and each other. But you listeners, give us purpose, and you give us the desire to try to make sure that we don't waste your time. We'll give you some entertainment, give you a little enlightenment, and hopefully make your day a little bit brighter and your week the best it can be. As always, you can talk to us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com or at legal@bufnagle.com. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram, and our podcast is available at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music, and all sorts of other places. Hey, if there's a platform out there that you need us to be on, let us know and we'll figure out how to get us on there. And if you're new to the podcast, hey, welcome. Thanks for coming. We are glad you are here. We ask you, please, to give us a couple of episodes. Come back weekly for a couple weeks in a row, and we'll talk about lots of things and hopefully some things that will interest you. We say give us 4 episodes, and we'll give you reasons to come back for more. Remember, tell a friend to listen, and you will get a free episode. So that's a deal you can't get anywhere else.
I think you're right on that. So, like I said earlier, we're back to exploring the world in the 1500s. But before we can explore the world in the 1500s, we have to rewind a little bit to remember where we left you off last time on Bufnagle the podcast. We were talking about the Vivaldi brothers, and they sailed west just before the century turned from the 13th century to the 14th century. They never came back. We also briefly talked about Marco Polo and the Silk Road. However, that's going to be a further deep dive that we get to later on. But now we're kind of looking at the things and technological advances that allowed Spain and Portugal to sail west and to kind of open up the world of Europe to the rest of the world in quicker, more efficient fashions.
Yeah, so remember, it was very expensive to get things along the Silk Road from the east to the west. And that caused a lot of people to invest lots of money into trying to figure out ways to make it cheaper. So, a number of things were happening back in the 1300s and 1400s to get us to where we are for Columbus and Magellan, who's going to be the focus thing today. So the 1300s brought us, Zach, the maritime chart, which is something we always use. So the idea that there's a compass and there are little lines that go out in the different directions, north, south, east, west, the compass rose idea. Those were very valuable for navigation. And it's important to keep in mind that maps back then weren't necessarily for what we use them today. They were ways to educate, they were ways to decorate, they were ways to tell stories. And they weren't just there for navigation, but the 1300s brought the maritime chart for navigation. The 1400s brought Ptolemy's Geographia back to Europe from the Middle East. All right. And this was a reintroduction of formal geography with latitude and longitude back into the West.
Yeah, so Ptolemy is a name we have mentioned multiple times on this podcast before. And I think it's important to look at who this Ptolemy was. He was Claudius Ptolemy. So we have a Greek name, and we have a Roman name of a guy who was born and died in Egypt.
Wait. So we talked about this in the past. We laid out this Egyptian dynasties, empire stuff, and the Greek Empire stuff, and the Roman Empire stuff. And this Ptolemy guy, he crosses all of those lines. He related to our best lady Cleopatra?
Um, that is disputed. So he was around in right early AD, so 100, 200 AD, and then he came up with the geographic that had the longitude and latitude and was one of those Hellenistic scientific advancements that we necessarily don't talk about all the time for reasons that we can discuss in another episode, which we will with the Renaissance and Dark Ages. So that's coming in the future. So that's something to look forward to. However, this Ptolemy, there have been um, many historians who have been able to trace and maybe question where he comes from. So there is an argument to be made that he's part of the Egyptian royal lineage, which relates back to Cleopatra and the other Ptolemies we have mentioned. There is also some evidence that points that he maybe wasn't part of that, and he was just a Greek guy who lived in Egypt, which is why he has a Greek name.
Yeah, so Ptolemy was like, is it as common as like Johnson or Jones or something like that, or is it? I mean, that's a pretty common Greek name, right?
Yeah, it was a fairly common Greek personal name for a lot of ancient Greeks as we would call them today, and then obviously Claudius is a Roman name, and there are plenty of Claudiuses we could talk about in Roman history, but that's not the topic for today's conversation.
Yeah, so Ptolemy did this whole thing with latitude and longitude. He wrote this book, and it had latitudes and longitudes or estimates of them for like thousands of places on the globe. And then that got lost, right? That got lost in the West, but it was maintained in Arabia, and the Arabian scholars added to it and improved the estimates and the numbers. And then in the 1400s, some guys were hanging out in Arabia, and they grabbed a copy of the book and they brought it back to the West, and guys were like, hey, this is a pretty cool way to do geography. So that was one of these scientific interchanges that were always taking place that came to light in the 1400s. All right, in 1415, this is a pretty important date, but Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, another thing to note about Ptolemy is he did have his own world map that was very detailed about the Arabic area that you mentioned earlier with Egypt, now currently Iran, and what would be at the time the Babylonian Empire. So he was this very well versed man who lived 1500 years before any of this stuff that we're talking about, whose works of art and creation was lost and then given back and allowed for more and newer exploration that we're going to talk about a little bit more.
Yeah, so there was a ton of stuff going on prior to this, and another big piece of this, right? What we're getting to Magellan, all right, and that's a Spain and Portugal story, all right. And there's an important thing here in 1415, the Portuguese took control of Ceuta, Ceuta, which is on the tip of Africa and Morocco. So it's like, if you know where Gibraltar is, the Strait of Gibraltar. Gibraltar is the rock on the north side. On the south side of that little narrow passage is Ceuta, all right? And the Portuguese were able to wrest control of that from Arab Muslims who had controlled that for a long time. And the Portuguese then set up a stronghold there in Africa and used that as a launching point for their exploration of Africa, right? So 20 years later, 1434, I always read this as Gileans. It's Gileanes, but it's pronounced, of course, because he was a Portuguese guy. It's Gilians. Gilians succeeded in passing the Cape, what's called Cape Bojador. All right, and that's a little. It's really interesting because you look to try to find it. It's the northwest corner of Africa, but it has really wacky currents and really wacky wind. And this guy Gilians was able to pass that and demonstrate that, yeah, you could start going down there. And that's where Africa starts turning from going west at that point to southwest, and then almost straight south down the big bulge, that western bulge of Africa.
Yeah, so this the Portuguese were able to have a very strong navy, which we have talked about in the past, but they've additionally been able to set themselves up for exploration of Africa and also into the Mediterranean Sea so that their trade routes became economically more efficient. So they were able to, invest that money back into their own exploration to continue this adventure.
Yeah, and they were really looking. I mean, they were very interested in getting around Africa. All right, so that there
And
was always
Africa
a
is very, 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 very big.
it is monstrously huge, and that is a thing. Like maps, oftentimes don't demonstrate that because most of the maps we see are Mercator projections, which are projections designed to allow for what's called straight line navigation, meaning you can draw a straight line on the map that will result in a straight line of navigation on the globe. But if you do an equal area projection, you will see Africa is just monstrously huge. It is unbelievable how big it is. You can fit like a zillion other continents inside Africa. It is
You could fit Africa inside Africa. It's that big.
Africa is really huge. Okay. So just for perspective, okay. So if you go down the west coast of Africa, I mean it's really long. It's a straight line down Africa, from the top to the bottom is about 5,000 miles. All right, as the crow flies, or on the crow's wing, as we used to say. So for perspective, the U.S. across continentally is about 3,000 miles. So it's like driving from L.A. to New York, and then 2/3 of the way back again, just to get from Sweden down to the Cape of Certain Death, or Cape of Good Hope. I'm sorry. Right? So it's a long way.
Yeah. So this is a massive, massive land space that people are trying to navigate around just so they can get to India, so they can get spices, so they don't have to eat crappy British food.
Yeah, that's it. And it is stunning what people will go through, to make their lives better, and I suppose that's probably a good thing. And there's other things they had to do. Okay, so Portugal is in the northern hemisphere, as is the Mediterranean Sea, and the equator kind of goes at the bottom part of that lump of Africa, and or the bump out on the west side. But way back in the 1200s and the 1300s, there was this perspective that the earth was divided into what they call zones. Okay, so like at the north and the south pole, they had these frigid zones. All right, and then there in between that and the middle area, which was the torrid zone, you had these temperate zones. So if you went from north to south, it went frigid, temperate, torrid, then and then frigid again. And they had this perspective that there was no way anybody could live along the equator because it was
They
just
thought it
too
was too
hot,
hot.
just too
Yeah.
hot.
Just like how it was too cold in the frigid zones.
Right. So and if you lived your whole life in this temperate zone where Europe is, and where a lot of the land in the north is, um, you could see that, man, we go south, it gets really nasty, it gets really hot. But when the Portuguese went south again and again and again, they found out, you can sail past the equator, right? And you're past the equator when you can no longer see the North Star. But they would see people like standing on the side. They sailed right down the coast, right? That was a thing to do because you don't want to get too far away because you lose your way,
Then you
right? But
lose where you are. Yeah.
they'd be sailing down the coast of Africa, and they'd look at the people on the shore, and they'd wave back, and they were like, you know, the whole idea. There was so much misinformation that had to be reconstructed when they did this exploration. So the Portuguese are going up and down the coast of Africa. Finally, in 1487, um, Bartolomeo Diaz doubled the Cape of Good Hope. Now, doubling is a word. Zach, I learned this. It means if you go around a thing in a ship, that's called doubling. So they doubled the Cape of Good Hope, and that was a big thing for them to do because then they could go to India.
Yeah, because so the Cape of Good Hope, if you're unaware of the geography of Africa, is the southernmost tip down there in South Africa today, and it is the opposite of good, as we have discussed later, because the Cape of Certain Death was not a thing people would want to double around. So instead, they called it the Cape of Good Hope. They kind of give hope that you can kind of get around it without dying.
Yeah, and it was a hard thing, all right? And the thing that makes doubling a cape difficult is if the winds are bad and the currents are bad and they shift. All right? So what you want as a sailor is something consistent. right? And when you're constantly having to adjust your sails and adjusting your tack relative to the wind and the currents, that's a really hard thing. And a lot of people died trying to get around the Cape of Good Hope. But Diaz did that in 1487. So keep in mind where we are. 1487 was Diaz going around the Cape of Good Hope. 5 years later was when Columbus went on his exploration to try to go west to get east. Okay, so that's where we are. So there's a lot of things going on. A lot of this, the technology was advancing for the Portuguese. They invented this thing called the caravel, which was this little exploration ship. They had the astrolabe, which is a way to do celestial navigation, right? And then they figured out how to steer by the stars, which was remarkable because then you didn't have to always be near land, all right? So Diaz goes around the Cape of Certain Death or Good Hope, all right, and then he goes into the Indian Ocean in 1487. Columbus makes 4 trips to the New World between 1492 and 1506. Okay. Now, he thought, of course, he had made it to China and Japan, and he actually thought he had the earthly paradise, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah, and additionally with Columbus, well, he's Columbus, but he miscalculated the circumference of the globe, which is something I believe we've talked on before, which is why his trip was not really seen as a um, good investment because everyone thought, yeah, you're not going to survive. You're going to go get scurvy and be stranded in the middle of the ocean here because you can't get all the way around because they didn't think there was land where North America is.
Right. We talked about that last time on the World Not Flat. Is they pretty much knew there couldn't be land, Zach, right? Because all their theories said there wasn't going to be. All right. So all of this exploration by Portugal and other countries, Spain was another one that was pursuing a lot of things. All right. Spain and Portugal got into this big fight, okay, about who owned what land when they were exploring it. And you can have all sorts of discussions about, well, maybe the people who were there owned the land. All right, I'll grant you that discussion. But Spain and Portugal were fighting for the rights to do business with these people that lived in these other places. All right, so in 1494, Spain and Portugal got together in this little town in Spain called Tordesillas. All right, and they called in the Pope to answer this question. Okay, whose land is whose, and how are we going to figure this? All right, so the Pope comes in and he says, what we're going to do is we're going to draw this line out in the ocean. All right, and it's going to be 100 leagues, which is about 400 miles, 100 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. All right, so if you know your islands in the Atlantic, I had to look all this stuff up. There's 3 main island groups in the Atlantic that you need to think about, right? From north to south.
Archipelagos for us and educated folks.
Right. That's a big word, Zach. Archipelago. Archipelago. You say it. You say tomato. I say potato. All right. So the one on the north is the Azores. All right, and that one is pretty much straight west of Portugal, and it's way out in the Atlantic. Right. Below that are the Canary Islands, and a lot of people have heard these things, and that's about halfway down the top half of Africa. Right. So you take that all the way down to the bump, right, and then halfway of that are the Canary Islands, and then the Cape Verde Islands are west of the furthest west point of the bump. Okay, so they're way out there. All right, and the Cape Verde Islands are a nice place to stop if you're going to the New World. Okay, so the Pope decided that Spain and Portugal would split up the things that they found because they were the ones running around, and they were going to draw a line 100 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. Okay, this line is about 46 degrees west of the prime meridian. All right, so it's not quite a quarter. It's about halfway of a quarter of the way around the planet. Right, and if you draw that line now, you will see that line that they set it up at 100 leagues, and then they moved it later to 370 leagues. That line chops off that bump of South America where Brazil sits. Okay, and they decreed that anything that is east of that line belongs to Portugal. All right, so Portugal got everything up and down the coast of Africa, and it got that little tip of South America that Brazil
is now present day Brazil.
And what language do they speak in Brazil?
Portuguese.
Yes, they do, because it was founded by the Portuguese. But then west of that line belonged to the Spanish. Okay, so everything west of that line of the Treaty of Tordesillas, everything west of that line belonged to Spain. All right, but that line didn't just go through the Atlantic. They knew the Earth was round, so they drew that line all the way over to the other side. And on the other side of that line are all these islands that are living over there in the island nations of the Pacific. Right. So, and the big question was, where are the Spice Islands? Okay. Of course, the Portuguese thought that they were on their side, and the Spanish thought they were on their side. All right. So there was a big problem. They had the line defined, but of course, no one could really measure longitude all that well. And you could get in trouble if you were poking around in the other people's territory. All right. So this is back to that, don't go into the other gang's territory. All right. So all of this is set up. All right. And into this, and there's two kings. Okay. There's a king in Portugal named Manuel.
There's a king in Spain.
And there's a king in Spain named Charles. All right. And Manuel's an old guy. He's like 50. He's like really old. Okay. And his wife dies, and he decides to marry the 21-year-old sister of the king of Spain. Okay.
That's, what you do in the 1500s.
Yes, what you do. Okay. Now the king of Spain went on to become the emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, which was
neither holy nor Roman nor an empire.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, this is really
Germany.
Yeah, this gets to be pretty complicated, but here's the issue. Right? Spain and Portugal are trying to stay friendly at home, but meanwhile, out on the high seas, they're fighting this battle for world domination of the ocean, right? And the spice trade. And into this whole mess sails this young man named Magellan, who's a Portuguese mariner, right? Who Manuel, king of Portugal, said, I don't want you to sail for me. You're free to sail for anybody else. So Magellan says, I'll sail for Spain.
Yeah. So, and all of that, Charles was like, hey, look, here's this Portuguese guy that I'm kind of sort of not related to because I married some Portuguese girl. And he gave Magellan a contract to, hey, go find these islands so I can make British food not suck.
Yeah, and Charles was broke. Okay, so that was the other thing. Charles needed the money. So he went and borrowed money, of course, to fund Magellan's operation. And Magellan puts together 5 ships and calls this the Armada de Molucca. And Molucca was the name of the islands where the Spice Islands are. All right. He's got 5 ships. He's got the Trinidad, which was his ship, San Antonio, Concepcion, Victoria, and Santiago. 5 ships make up Magellan's Armada.
Yeah. So then Magellan, who's Portuguese and who is sponsored by a Spanish king, gets together a bunch of Spanish sailors and decides that I'm going to lead you guys, except for the fact that the Spanish guys don't trust him.
Right, and not only
what can go wrong?
Right, but not all the sailors were Spanish. I mean, some were Greek, and some were Egyptian, and some were English, and some were Portuguese. But nobody trusted anybody, right? Because they were all from the other country, and most of all, the Spanish sailors didn't trust Magellan because he was Portuguese, and the Portuguese didn't trust Magellan because he was sailing for Spain. All right, so this was an amazing setup. The fact that he wasn't mutinied the first day they left the harbor was amazing. All right, so this is in 1518, March of 1518. He gets the contract. All right, and he has to prep for all this. He gets the 5 ships together, and they're getting ready to leave.
Yeah, so he's a guy who legitimately doesn't have a country, but he's like, I'm going to go be a sailor because I could be a great explorer because it's the 1500s, and why not?
Well, right, because if you're a great explorer and you go discover a great thing, you can come back and the king will make you like a governor of like Fiji or something, whatever you find, right? And then you can pass that governorship, that nobility onto your family, and they are set. Okay, that was Magellan's plan. So, all right, so he starts in 1518 getting the things together. He gets 5 ships, all right, and they get 260 men, and they leave from Castile, and they go down the river, right? And on September 26th, 1519. Okay, so September of 1519, on the 20th of September they leave the port, and on the 26th they get to the Canary Islands. Okay, while they're getting right, and they always island hop whenever they can because that you have to carry fewer goods with you. All right, so they resupply there at the Canary Islands. Magellan learns that the king of Portugal, remember the king who told him he could sail for anybody else, the king of Portugal has dispatched 2 fleets of caravels to hunt down Magellan. All right, so this guy is a week out of port, and he learns that you know what, Portugal's coming to get you, and they have 2 fleets looking for you.
Yeah. Additionally, these fleets are the same ships that the Portuguese created that were smaller, lighter, faster, and they were able to quickly get out. So he's a week ahead, and he has 2 fleets of some very strong, fast, light exploration ships coming looking for him. He's
Trying to
literally on the run.
And not only that, he learns that the Castilian captains, the Spanish captains in his own armada are likely to mutiny at the first opportunity they get. Okay. So they leave the Canary Islands at midnight, October 3rd, 1519. Okay. October 3rd. Just fast forward, December 13th, the fleet arrives in Rio de Janeiro. Now, I don't know if you really know where that is, but Brazil sticks out as a little point, and then it tucks back underneath, and Rio is tucked up underneath it. Okay, so it's not a far shot from the Canary Islands down to the tip of South America. It's not
But
very
it
far.
did take them 60 days to get there. That's a long time.
Well, it took longer than that for Columbus to get to the New World, right? I mean, so it was 2 months at sea, right? 2 months at sea that they get there.
Hoping they don't get scurvy.
That's coming up, all right? In the intervening days, all right, so they had the Castilian captain of the Santiago had mutinied, and Magellan had shut that down. All right. All right. So they get to Rio, and the natives come out of the woods. They're like, hey, more explorer ships. We can trade. We can get trinkets. We can trade for gold or wood. All right. And everybody comes out. There's this great meet and greet, I suppose, as you call it. They get there. The native women really dig the sailor. All right. And the sailors, of course, being on ship for 60 days, really dig the native women. All right. And they offer all sorts of, let's just say, Zach, everything was offered in exchange for everything. Let's just put it that way. All right. This is December 1519. They are down at Rio, and Rio then, not a lot of different than Rio now, I would guess. All right. They hang out there in December, and on the 27th, they leave Rio and head south along the South American coastline. Okay. So it's December. So keep in mind, in south of the equator, it's summer. All right, and even at Rio, where it's near the equator, it's nice, it's warm.
Yeah, so these guys started in the northern hemisphere, and then they moved down to the southern hemisphere when they get to Brazil. So they've kind of just been chilling in summer, nice weather for a majority of this trip, which is beneficial for them. They don't have to deal with winter winds and storms of the nature.
Yeah, they get summer storms, of course, or you can get hurricanes come in the autumn in that area, and I think they had some storms, but they all 5 ships made it to Rio. They're going down the coastline. Okay, now keep in mind, Zach, this is I think we have this perspective, and I certainly did, about Magellan going around the world. It's kind of like, well, like I could drive right now. I could get in my car this afternoon, and I could drive like to Miami. I could do it, and I would like stop along the way, and I'd buy Cheetos, or I'd buy. I'd refill up at the gas and sip, and I'd make it to Miami sometime tomorrow. All right. These guys had none of that. All right. They are stocking fresh water, or they can't even get water out of the thing. The only thing that's convenient for them is taking a leak over the side of the ship. I mean, that's quite frankly, that's the only thing that's easy for them. They're taking food with them. You know what they ate? They they ate this thing called hardtack. You ever heard of that?
Yeah.
It's like a cracker. Okay, so this barrel's full of like essentially flour and water that's been dried. Okay, and of course, because they had no preservatives, this hardtack was loaded with eggs of parasites. Right, so as they moved along, the parasites would hatch, and then you'd get like worms in the hardtack. Okay, and then maybe give you a little protein, but right, so the hardtack sucked, the water sucked. The food, if they were lucky, they could catch a rat and grill it. On the little thing they have on the deck. And meanwhile, they're working really hard, okay, because they're like they're running the capstan, and they're hoisting sails, and they're doing all sorts of sailor things. And they were out where they really don't know where they're going. All right. So these guys are 60 days into this journey, right? And they're going down the shoreline, and they're trying to find a strait. They have heard that there's a strait, there's a passageway across the continent, so to speak, and they're searching for it, and they're going south. They finally get to the city where Buenos Aires is, right? And the place there is called the Rio de Plata, right? That's the river there. And they are south of the equator. In fact, Rio sits 23 degrees south, right? And 23 degrees, that's like Cuba. Okay. So it's still a pretty warm area, but it is now getting to be, they're moving into winter, right? Because they're moving from December in toward June. So they're moving into winter in the southern hemisphere. It's getting colder and colder. On March 31st, 1520. So they've been at it, what, 6 months or so. On March 31st, after weeks of storms and squalls, the Armada stops at a place called Port St Julian, which is 49 degrees south latitude. Right now, for what that's worth, that's about where Lake Superior is, or Newfoundland, or Seattle. Right, and that's March 31st. So flip the calendar upside down. We're talking like early October in Newfoundland, or in Seattle, or in Lake Superior. The weather's turning. It's getting bad, and they're stopping there to wait out the winter on March 31st.
Yeah, so when we mentioned south of the equator, it's the equivalent of being north of the equator. It's really getting close to that frigid zone that we talked about earlier. So Seattle, Newfoundland, um, Lake Superior, those are places that get cold. Well, Seattle not really cold in the winter, and there's lots of treacherous weather that you have to deal with. It's the same thing in the southern hemisphere, except the times are flipped. So it's not that, oh, it's like Cuba. No, it's like that's the distance it is from the equator, and that's the type of temperate zone that they would be living in. The temperate zone here is more of that frigid zone that is akin to the northern states here in America, or Canada with, well, all of Canada.
Yeah, all of Canada is pretty much in the frigid zone, and a lot of that has to do like England. Zach, is very far north, but they have this Gulf Stream that brings warm, brings heat up north, right? And I'm sure there are things like that happen in the southern. Anyway, the Armada stops at Port St Julian for the winter, right? On March 31st, right? April 1st is Easter. Okay, so it's Easter, and these guys are sailing for Spain. Spain is highly Catholic. They're going to say, we're going to celebrate Easter. So they go ashore to celebrate Mass. Right? Magellan says we're going to go celebrate Easter Mass on the shore. Right? But only one of the other captains attends. Right? There's 5 captains. Right? And only 2 of them go there. Right? And Magellan knows something's up. He's like, these guys should be coming to Mass. What's going on? And he discovers that the other 3 captains are planning a mutiny for Easter night. Okay, so
why not?
Yeah, what could go wrong? So here you are in Port St Julian. You're trying to get yourself through the winter. You're gonna spend at least 4 to 5 months repairing ships, repairing sails, taking on food, all sorts of stuff. To make a long story short, with that at Port St Julian, Magellan shuts down the rebellion. It's a masterful stroke of I guess
political genius.
Well, it's political genius, and it's military might and a little subterfuge. And he gets control of the Armada again the next day. Okay, Victoria's captain. Remember, Victoria was one of the ships. Mendoza gets killed in suppressing the mutiny. He was one of the mutineers, and he gets killed. And Magellan orders that his body be treated as that of a traitor. Right, which means what they do is they stretch his body between the capstans. Right, you know what a capstan is? It's that big thing that you roll the rope up, right? Or you roll the anchor up, and it's a big round thing. It's got those sticks on it, and the guys push it to get a lot of leverage, and it clicks as it goes. So it ratchets. All right. And they take his arms and they tie it to one of the capstan and his feet to the other capstan, and they stretch him, and they literally pull his body to pieces. Okay. And then Magellan says, take the pieces of his body, put them on sticks, and put them on shore, so that every day all the men will see that's what happens if you're a traitor. Okay. And those body parts hung there the whole time they were there at Port St Julian. Okay. At the end of the mutiny, there were 40 sailors that were sentenced to death for mutiny. All right. He started with 260. All right. He's already lost guys to the mutiny.
Scurvy.
And scurvy's coming. All right. Magellan commuted the sentences of all but these 2 guys. Okay. One of them was a guy named Quesada, which I always think of like cheese guy. All right. And then his servant Molino, they were to be executed. right? But Magellan, I don't understand how you do this thing to somebody. Molino was Quesada's servant, and Magellan said, "Okay, Molino, you're going to be executed along with Quesada, unless you do the execution for us." All right, so Molino is stuck with this choice: do I execute the guy I've been serving all this time and spare my life, or do I say no, I'm not going to execute him and I get killed? Right? That's Spartacus, man. That's the same question. All right. In the end, Molina takes the deal. All right. And he has to behead his master. So he pulls out his sword. Everybody's there on the deck of the ship. They make Quesada kneel down with his head there, and his servant chopped off his head. All right. And then at the end of that, it did to his body exactly what they did to the other guy. I mean, this was gruesome, brutal, difficult procedure. But you know what? If you're going to command 260 guys on a trip around the world, you can't have people not following the chain of command. It was terrible. A couple weeks later, when they're doing the Christmas things, 2 other people get convicted of the mutiny. One is like one of the captains, and the other one's a priest. Right. And they got convicted as well. And they weren't sentenced to death, Zach. They were sentenced to be left behind when the Armada left the port. Okay. So in the spring, when they leave, they take these 2 guys and they put them on one of the islands. They give them some hardtack. They give them some berries. They give them some wine, and they say, "Good luck."
Bye.
And they sail away. I mean, it is amazing. It is amazing what they had to go through. All right. So this is at Port St. Julian. Remember, they've only been gone like 6 months, and they're not even halfway around the world. They haven't even gotten to the Strait of Magellan. It is it's a wonderful story, and
And all this time too, the Portuguese are still trying to chase Magellan somehow.
Yeah, they're chasing him down the coast. All right, so he's still got the 5 ships. Okay, so what he does during the winter break, he says, "Okay, guys, I want you to take the Santiago, and I want you to go down the coast and look for the strait." So the Santiago starts sailing down the coast. All right, and this massive storm comes up and shipwrecks the Santiago and smashes the ship to pieces. They are 70 miles south of Port St. Julian. All right. They have no food. They have no water. There are 37 men stuck there on the shore. Okay. And you know what? We know about this. You know why? Because they made it back. Right. They grabbed pieces of the ship, these 37 guys, and they start dragging this stuff over the snow-covered mountains, all right, up to this river that's 3 miles wide. It's the Santa Cruz River in South America. You can go look it up. All right. They stop short of the river. They take 2 guys. They make this little tiny raft out of the scraps. These 2 guys paddle across the 3-mile river in winter. Right. They get to the other side. They go over the swamp, over the snow-covered mountains. For 11 days, they march with no water, no food, no shoes, nothing.
No warm winter jackets.
No GPS, no tents, no ropes.
No cell phone.
No boats, no lights, no motor cars, not a single luxury. All right, and they go over the mountains, and they finally get back to Port St. Julian, and they stumble out of the woods, and they're like, "Where have you guys been?" And they were like, "We're shipwrecked down there. There's 35 other guys down there." So one of the ships is wrecked, and Magellan's going, "Well, I can't risk another ship." All right. So he takes 24 other guys, and he says, "You guys go back down there and rescue those 37." So those 24 guys, they grab provisions and they go back over the mountains, back over the swamp, swim, paddle across the river. They find the 35 other guys. They build this other tiny little raft. They go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth across the river. 2 or 3 sailors at a time getting across the river. It takes hours to get across this 3-mile wide river, which has got currents, it's got wind, it's got freezy stuff. They finally get all 35 guys across the river. 35 guys march back over the mountains, back over the swamps, all right, back to Port St. Julian. All 37 of those guys survived and made it back to Port St. Julian, which was not like that wasn't
Miami.
No, it was not Miami. It's not Nashville. It's not even Minneapolis. All right, it is Port St. Julian in 1520.
Yeah, there was this. Magellan lost a ship. He's lost the men to an almost mutiny and certain death because you're on an adventure, and he's doing all these things, and he's trying to keep this group together, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, so I'm going to send 24 more guys to help there's so many things going on. They don't have GPS. They don't have the technology we have today. But he's like, we're gonna do it. They go out and they chase it, and they keep getting back up, and they're repairing the other ships that they have so that when the time comes, they can set sail and hopefully find, they do find, spoiler alert, Magellan Strait. However, we're out of time for today, so we will pick this back up in a future episode. So just, earmark the page here, and we'll get back to it very shortly. Rafe, do you have any other housekeeping things or Magellan things to clean up?
Well, I would just say Magellan, long before he was a mutual fund or a GPS machine or a collection of stars in the Southern Hemisphere, he was an explorer guy, Portugal sailing for Spain. And they went through a lot of stuff. So keep in mind, whenever you're stuck at a red light for two cycles, right, or you run out of gas, it could be a whole lot worse. So we'll get back to more trials and tribulations of Magellan in a coming episode.
Yeah, remember, you could always be stuck at Port St Julian, but you're not. So there's always good takeaways there. But if you don't have anything else, we're going to look forward to seeing you guys around for another episode. Thank you all for listening. Go seek the good, be the good, and spread the good. Enjoy the adventure of life.